Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. And as you can tell from the title up there, continuing my trek through Everybody Loves Raymond Season 6. We're now on the episode that I've been mentioning off and on for the last couple years, ever since I started this series. That is most likely going to be a rant. That, of course, is Raybert, written by Steve Skrovan. Well, they can't all be gold. And I'm going to say the fears I thought about when I started the series are true. This is going to be one that I'm going to, other than a couple moments, really go to town on. Just a reminder, though, if you want to support the channel, both the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. If you want to continuously support the channel and gain access to videos early, go the Patreon route. If you want to just do a one-off, go the PayPal route. Either way, your support is appreciated. Raybert. Now, I'll get off with the fun stuff first. Now, if you take apart the one big thing that I'm going to rant on in this episode, this would have been a decent episode. Probably still not my cup of tea because of how it handles the mistaken identity thing. Because of it is a couple steps away from the spouse has sex with the identical twin of the other spouse without realizing, usually the evil twin. Would have been tolerable, though. And there are a few little fun moments, like the unraveling of the lies, and of course, Peter Boyle as Frank's reaction to everything, just the little smirk he has on him. If you can think of the most Frank of all Frank smirks, that's the way Peter Boyle reacts. And him just reacting to everything the way he would. And of course, Robert calling himself an idiot later on. Deborah trying to make him feel better. Which, just in principle, is good, but in the context of the episode, especially with what I'm going to yell about in a second, it's like, wonder what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this. Because I'm going to read off what the DVD says is the synopsis of the episode, so you guys get a little thing. A woman Robert is dating thinks he is Ray. That's the plot in a nutshell. Now, with that little nut kernel of plot, you could have made a better episode, because you're going to see why. Now, as I've mentioned in other ones, watch it through this episode on the DVD when I first got it, because I did not see this one in syndication. I don't even remember if this one played in syndication. If it did, it's probably one I never saw. When I was watching a lot of them for the first time, I'm like, oh, that's good. Some of them I started skipping for various reasons, like Fascinating Deborah, the babysitter one, and watching them through on this review series as an older adult. I'm appreciating a lot more of them now. Some of them are still on the depends on my mood list. A couple of them have been on the skip list. This one is going to be perpetually on the skip list. And as it was then, because watching it when I was young, there was just something about it. Maybe I just didn't like how it handled the mistaken identity cliches here, and as I put it in other episodes, sitcom writing. But now looking at it, there is another reason, and this is a reason that was always in the back of my mind. Subconsciously, I noticed, but just never consciously. And that is what part of the driving force of the plot of this episode is. Now, I'm going to have to bring this up by going into the specifics of what this episode is about. Now, Robert comes over to Ray's house, lets him know that at the bar the previous night he met this beautiful woman. Ray's being his usual self. Yeah, you notice her Adam's apple, you run out of singles. And you can tell Robert's trying to get through it with all the jokes. And he tells Ray that, it was a good date. There's just one little tiny problem. And that's because the date thought he was Ray. Because it was a sports bar. He got something spilled on him. He said, here you go, Mr. Barone. And she jumped to a conclusion that he's Ray Barone of New York Newsday. Even though I don't really bring up a lot of things about plot holes and all that. But when you think about it, this lady, as it turns out, is an uber fan of Ray. If she was a big fan of Ray, she should at least know what he looks like. So that whole thing would fall apart. Even if you go into the old school thing where they don't have your photo next to your name, if she's as an uber fan as the plot describes her as, she would have looked up what he looked like and know that this is not Ray. But just for the sake of plot, let's put that aside for now. That's one thing to rant on, because that's a plot hole that when you look at it and go, okay, yeah. It's just something that falls apart, and after that the plot works just because the plot says it does. I don't like bring that up a lot, but this is an instance where you got to. Robert was firing all cylinders. He was rolling nothing but natural 20s at the bar. Now, they hit it off well, go back to their place, and they have sex. And of course, Ray being himself is like, ooh, yeah, what type of sex? Asking all the questions. Robert not wanting to answer them. And the plot goes from there. And then the typical situations you can think of. Where she sends stuff for Robert that goes to Ray's office. Ray comes with it. It's brownies, and she's there. They got to do this whole little thing where Ray has to pretend to be Robert while Robert's Ray. Hence the title of the episode, Raybert. They realize they work well off each other in this situation, and then they try it in the laundromat, and it works a bit. It's a little awkward because, at least from our perspective, from the character's perspective, they're like, these brothers are weird, but okay, I guess they really are just that energetic. And this is where we get that little thing where they coined it, like, we've invented a world where people like Raybert. And of course, just one little side thing, in the blooper reel for this season, this is one of those moments where Ray went off and did something that was just for the audience that he knew was going to cut. Where he's like, with my money and your penis, we're unstoppable. Brad Garrett's looking at him like, obviously trying to think of what to say to that, and he's like, you better have a lot of money. that line's always made me laugh. And of course it all unravels in the end because the lady, Natasha, if I remember her name right, shows up at Ray's house, and the whole thing of lies comes crashing down, and Robert has to tell Natasha the truth. And of course, watching it now as an adult, with how the actress, it's going to be Anna Ortiz, who played Hilda in Ugly Betty, plays off it, you can tell she's uncomfortable with the whole situation. And this is probably the closest the episode gets to touching on why I'm going to rant on the main thing with this. But it's more in the subtleties and how she performs it and how she says something, because she never brings it up directly. It's more the typical stuff that you would expect in this situation if all they had done was make out or mainly kiss or something like that. And then it goes into the post thing where they're all trying to figure out why Robert did this. And then the last joke is Robert brings up the fact they did it in the laundromat, and Ray has to try to get out of it like, I go fix it up now, and gets out of there. I sped through all that because, as you can tell from how I'm talking about, I don't really want to spend more time than necessary talking about the synopsis. Now, those of you who hadn't caught it yet, you guys kind of see yet what the main issue with the plot of this thing is, other than the fact that it's the one trope I mentioned? I'll bring it up. I'll rewind back. Robert goes from the bar with Natasha to her house and has sexual intercourse with her when she thinks that he is Ray. I want you to think on that for a second. And some of you are probably going, why is that an issue? Because technically, Natasha only had sexual intercourse with Robert because she thought he was Ray. Wrong but wrong. If she thought he was Robert, she might have if they hit it off well, but it was a certain when she thought it was Ray. So technically, Robert had sexual intercourse with Natasha under false pretenses. So if you really want to get down to it, technically, it's not forceful, but technically, Robert Barone, decorated New York City Police Department lieutenant, raped Natasha. Now, it's not forceful rape, but it's still rape nonetheless, since it was done under false pretenses. Now, I know some of you, maybe not my constant viewers, but people who go in every now and then are going to go, wait a minute, that's not rape even with that. Yeah, technically it is. And just to prove it, I even looked under the statute in New York, since this is where it takes place. Technically, these are the statutes. And by the way, I am going to use the hard R word for this because it is a whole thing involving law, and as a rant, I'm not going to hold back on it. Now, there's multiple degrees under New York law. For first degree, that's the typical thing, force involved or compelling the victim through the use or threat of use, whether it's like I'm going to beat you up if you don't, or I'm going to kill this person if you don't. Whether you're physically helpless, so date rape stuff. If you're less than 11 or less than 13 and the defendant is older than 18. So I guess that second to last one's probably for anybody, but they have to specify it for the other one. I don't know if there's like different charges on here. It's not mentioning that. Second degree is when he or she engages in sexual intercourse with another person who is less than 15 and the defendant is 18 years or more. So I guess they lessen it as the age gets closer to 18. And who is incapable of consent by reason of being mentally disabled or mentally incapacitated. So I guess you could say exploiting someone's mental capabilities, such as molesting someone with Down syndrome or some similar condition, or they are in a vegetative state, comatose, anything similar to that, where obviously they cannot consent because of their condition. Now this last one is the one we're going to be considering with. I'm just reading it down so that you understand where it is in the chain. A person is guilty of third degree when he or she engages in sexual intercourse with another person who is incapable of consent by reason of some factor other than being less than 17 years old. So like I said, the age again. Who is less than 17 and the defendant is 21 years or more. And here's the last one. This is the part that's really going to concern us. Without such person's consent, which is withheld for some other reason, the incapacity to consent. So, under false pretenses would fall under that. She, like I said, she only had sex with Robert because she thought he was Ray. Now, there is a chance she still would have, but that's a hypothetical. In the situation that actually happens in the episode, she does not know. And that's why I say that little subtleties in the actress's performance at the end when she finds out the truth. And even if it's not written there in the law like that, you still call a spade a spade. You still look at it and go, that's it. It's just like the people that would say back in the day you couldn't rape your spouse because of your wedding vows. Which, by the way, last I checked, in a lot of states, that only became illegal in the early 90s, like about a decade before this episode was shot. Think about that. You would think something like that would have become illegal, like, after the Civil War, or if you really want to push it into, like, the 1950s, but nope. Even after the whole women's sexual revolution and all that, in a lot of places it was still legal. Or there wasn't even a concept of marital rape. I'm just bringing that up just to show that there were even recently that some weird things about that. And to it, this is something I was saving for this part of the rant. This is definitely an episode that would not be made today. Now I know some people are going to go, oh, go woke, go broke. I would just throw that woke word around, even though for me, about 90-95% of the time I see people throw that word around, I'm always like, you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. There are a few times where I'd say it is accurately used. Ghostbusters 2016 a little bit, but I think that goes closer to the film just not being funny, and the fact that it's about female Ghostbusters is more secondary. Because if it was male characters, the film would still not be funny with the same dialogue. The only part in there I'd say is kind of woke is the whole thing with Chris Hemsworth's character, because that's cringe. And I mean, I already did a whole rant on that movie if you want to see it, but it's probably the closest part of that film, and a couple other bits of dialogue where it comes to being, at least for me, like just from what I've seen of Dark Fate, I wouldn't say that's woke. And with that, I know this is a little mini rant about that, but the people throwing around that word, I think are starting to get just as annoying as the people that they are trying to oppose. So it's like a whole switch from one side to the other, where it's like, oh my god, really, guys? You don't really have to throw a label like that around with it. But anyway, even if you want to throw that in here, not making an episode like this today is not being woke. It's being right. And it's not being a dick. Because throwing that type of thing in there, it really doesn't age well in the right way. I mean, there's other episodes and other stuff that doesn't age well. Because this goes in the same category as a certain scene from Revenge of the Nerds. The difference being, that one, of course, made a decade earlier, but also that one, it kind of salvages itself just a little bit because of the fact that it turns into a consensual relationship, from what I understand, afterwards, even though some people go, bleh. But yeah, that's why I say it kind of. Still doesn't forgive the whole thing of the scene, but it kind of does. And that's a scene that also would be made today unless it was followed with the nerd getting his ass whooped. And even though the nerds would probably join in with the ass kicking, the nerd from Robot Chicken would probably join in with the ass kicking. But with this, it's like, yeah. If it was made today, though, they would have taken out that one moment and made it to where they just kissed or something like that, or just start dating. No sexual thing. Because then, Robert's still a dick in this episode, especially following everything else that's happened in his love life in the last season and a half. But he's not a super dick. And as a cop, he should know better. Like that law that I brought up, I don't have a year for when it was put into effect, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's at least a couple decades old. And even if it wasn't on the books, any laws similar to that, Robert should know better. And before anyone cuts in and all that, I don't think all cops are dicks. I've worked with it in my job as a security officer, both at my current one and at my previous one where I actually worked in the courthouse. There's only a couple cops I've met that'd be like, yeah, this guy's a dick and I really wouldn't want him to show up. I'm not going to name any of them, but only a couple. And I've also found that usually the officers that work for the sheriff's department are a lot chiller than the ones that work for the metropolitan or the small towns. Those ones seem to be more, the tough guys that you guys see in all the videos. Plus, as another little aside, having worked security and dealt with people in similar situations, I don't 100% trust the video. I like to know the context behind why is a guy just being a dick or pulling a Karen/Kyle, to use those phrases, because he's not getting his way and thinks he shouldn't be getting in trouble for something he should be getting in trouble for, or is a cop actually being a dick and having a power trip. You got to look at it full in the context. I have stories I could tell, but I'm not going to in this one. Just cutting that part off at the pass in case they want to come in here and comment under that for me making that point about Robert. But point is, as a lieutenant especially, supervisory/manager role in the police department, he should know better. I mean, if she had wanted to file charges against him, she would, and he'd be held to a higher standard. Now, I know some people would go, the police have gone, well, we investigated ourselves and found nothing wrong with it. Maybe. But then Robert's name would have been marred, and rightfully so. Name dragged through the mud and everything. People bringing up on stuff. They would have probably interviewed Stefania, Amy, probably Joanne, everybody, and Robert's name would be thrown through the mud. But of course, it's a sitcom, so they're not going to go that dark, at least in this type of sitcom. Maybe 2.5 Men would go that dark, or a sitcom like that, but Raymond, especially the time period he was made, it's not going to go that dark. Maybe All in the Family might have a little bit for like an episode or two, but it's not going to go that dark. Drama series definitely would have gone that dark. Dramedy definitely would have gone that dark, especially one made nowadays. But back in the early 2000s, no, it's not going to go that. But it's just that thing makes this a loathe level episode. If it wasn't for that, this would just be I don't really have a reason to watch it anymore because it's just not my cup of tea. But that thing just turns it and be like, really? Like I said, Steve Scroven's the one that wrote this, and like I said at the top, they can't all be gold. But Steve, he deserves a putazo like no other for writing this plot. And I hope that Ray and Phil were not the ones in the writer's room who suggested that. Because if they were, they also deserve a putazo for this. Whoever suggested that part of it being there deserves a big old putazo for it. And I'm looking at the notes I have for the Emmys. Let's see, this one didn't win anything, did it, or get nominated? Thankfully, no. So at least the Emmys had some sense then, because this would not be one that would be great. I know someone's going to say, but you like the sculpture and you like the breakup tape episode. Yeah, because those ones are more typical sitcom fare and they're more tame. I mean, the whole thing with the sculpture one is because nobody realizes it at first, and Ray slowly starts, quote-unquote, perverting their minds so they see what the statue looks like. This one, it's just one of those things. And I'm surprised more people haven't talked about that part of it. I know the people that would throw the woke name would probably be because everybody could take a joke. This is not taking a joke. I like dark humor, but this is not the right type of dark humor. Now I know with what Carlin said in his thing that you can find a way to joke about it, but this is not the way. Especially with this type of character, no. This is definitely an episode you can skip. But if you want to show your friends or you're showing this show how this show can be a negative time capsule at times, this is definitely an episode. I mean, if you get past that little plot point, you might find some enjoyment in the episode, but the episode wasn't for me. And like I mentioned, that little plot point involving Raybert and Natasha pushed this episode into the loathing. I'm sorry there wasn't more yelling, but it's one of those ones that it's like, I just can't get up the energy to yell regarding this one, so it's more a rambling rant. Should have hired Ramblin' Rabbit. Look like I'm wearing my Undertaker shirt. If I had his powers, I would make sure this episode would rest in peace. Now, this is the final one on the DVD, so I can't even look to see what the next episode is going to be, and it's not in the notes, but hopefully the next episode's a pick-me-up from this one, because if it's another one where I'm like, then the season's mid-part is going to be a little bit of a downer. Until next time, guys.